Thank you very much for all coming. This is one of the highlights of my years. Every year we have this, and there's people who are patient groups. The most important political group in the whole ME struggle are the patient groups, I assure you. Politicians go to bed fearing them, you know. They don't know anything about science. They don't know their bacteria from their viruses. And you know what? They don't care. And I'm going to say something about how I see politicians and what a problem they are. And I want to start off by apologizing to all our friends, my friends from Europe here. I feel exceptionally embarrassed that we're coming out of Europe. I really, really do, and I'm really angry about it. And anything to stop it, you know, it's just disgraceful. I spent my life talking to European students who were in my laboratory, getting degrees, Erasmus students and so on, and it made such a difference to your life where you met people from other countries. And that's true here too. He said 15 countries here. It's absolutely amazing that we have that interaction. So I'm very embarrassed, and I've been thinking, what shall I do with the parliamentary people in the parliament down the road here? What do you do with those 650 jerks who can't make a decision and keep changing their minds every 5 minutes, and they are really an embarrassment? Well, I've got a solution. I thought it up. There's an island called the Shetland Islands at the top of Scotland, which is pretty barren. Now, the Norwegians might own it, you know, but you're not getting it back without a fight, I tell you, because I'm going to put 650 MPs in there. I'm going to close the House of Lords, because they don't do nothing much anyway. They think they do. But we're going to put them there in the north. And that building they're in down there, which is falling apart anyway, because it's full of asbestos, the mice run riot in it. The electrics don't work properly. The cabling's all over the shop. It's been there for centuries, and no one's been able to find the clues and so on. And you know, what we'll do is we'll either make it into a care home, a museum, or just make it in a car park, probably, because there's a problem. So anyhow, you know, the money that would be saved in not doing that building would be millions, which I would take gladly. So, you know, we'll make sure the boat comes over to the island of Shetlands, you know, once every 6 months. They'll be given a little food to start with, and they'll just have to make their own, the sods. So, I mean, we really have to do something about this Brexit thing, because it's really tearing this country apart. You may not sense it, but there are fights. My wife was in a fight with an Australian in a Vancouver hotel who tried to tell us what to do, and what she said about Australians, I'd never seen her in that mood before, but she was so angry. He was telling us that Brexit was the best thing that could happen to Britain. I had to pull them apart. He fell over and they took him off to hospital. So I wasn't too worried about it. Can I say, though, that ME, you know, what we've heard today is just amazing. We've had 3 days full on, and, you know, it's exciting. It is exciting, informative, encouraging, and I want to see that continue forevermore. Can I say that I've investigated other illnesses too? Ulcerative colitis, and another one I'm very interested in is anorexia, bulimia. And, you know, what's not done in that is nobody's business. But, you know, I've always been kind of soft on that, because Princess Diana made it hum a bit, you know. And a celebrity can sometimes make a little difference, as you see in climate change at the minute with David Attenborough and that brilliant young woman from Sweden, I think she is, who came out of school and sat outside the parliament, I think, in Sweden. And the city of London is full of young people who bag off school once a week, and they're making a real difference in climate change, which politicians who've never understood what it's all about anyway, you know, have done nothing for years and years and years. So there are things happening which are encouraging amongst all these depressive things that are happening around Brexit. It's not over yet, because I don't think they'll ever solve it, and getting them in the Shetlands will be a real advance. And I'm sorry for the Shetlanders, but, you know, if you Norwegians want the islands back, I'll do a deal with you. Now, can I say that the meeting this week here that we've had, the 3 solid days of it, are absolutely been enthralling. You have seen comradeship, you've seen interactions, you've seen positive communications, you've seen cooperation, collaboration, all those words. And what we haven't seen is that kind of, I was brought up in American science, and it was very competitive. I was told not to give something to somebody at Florida, Nancy, and you know, don't give them the cells because they'll publish the work and all the rest of it. And my boss in Scotland said, don't you dare not give them it, you know. And there was a kind of atmosphere which you were brought up in of competition and making sure that nobody got your results and managed to beat you and so on. So things are happening in the world of medicine. Not just in ME, which we've seen here in the last few days, but they're happening elsewhere. There's a woman, it was recorded, from Inverness in Scotland, and bless her, she's got no pain. She's had children, had no pain whatsoever. And the paper has been published, and I mean, the science is too complicated for me. I could never understand it, but it's about certain enzymes and so on. Now, I don't know how frequent it is, but gosh, living in Scotland without any pain, you know, could be transferred to the south of England without any harm whatsoever. And of course, the DNA technology, which we've heard a bit about today, is really fantastic. And the things that people can do now are just out of this world, and we should encourage that. Gene therapy, stem cell biology, all those things really cheer me up when I get depressed, and that they're going to be very, very relevant to many of the problems that we have. And the work on the digestive system has always crazed me. I once, as a student, had to write an article on insects. Mycetomes, I think, were the organelles, and they were full of bacteria. And my boss, the swine, at the time, my supervisor, said, find out what they do. Now, I didn't know. They lived inside the cells, as kind of symbiotic environment and so on. But I've always remembered that, and I'm so pleased that we're taking it up with the microbiome biome in humans and trying to correlate it with some of the health problems that we've got. I'm so glad, too, that there are other countries here, Australia and Sweden and Norway and so on, Scotland, Ireland. I think I'm probably the only Scot here, but that counts, you know. We're quite happy with that. And I think the seminar with all the young people in it was really, really stimulating. And the enthusiasm beats anything I've seen. I referred to the local football team, which Richard is, and seeing them this year was a revelation how they liked each other, actually. They played together, they supported each other, they played piggyback at half time. Now, you don't often see that in people that are getting about £500,000 a month or something, but it was really, really good, and it gives you a confidence that people really do care and can get things done, and they've been promoted this year, and it's going to help a city develop and so on. I want to just also say two things. I mean, I want to say thank you to the staff here who look after us every year. It's hard work living with some of us, especially when we're in the bar late and so on, but they do it, and their courtesy and the work they put in for us is fantastic. So Richard, say thank you from all of us for the work they do, especially the people who serve the coffee and help us take crumbs off the floor and all that kind of stuff. They are brilliant, they really are, so thank you very much. And can I say to you and Pia, can I say to you and Pia, you're absolutely magnificent. I don't know how you do it. You live it, you love it, you make it happen. These two guys run this whole conference. And I often say this every year, some of you have heard it. It would cost you £30,000 to get a PR company plus to come and do all the things they do. The programs, booking the rooms, getting people here, getting the speakers, getting the stuff up on the discs and whatnot, organizing the speeches. It's absolutely amazing. Richard and Pia, thank you very, very much for the work you do. Long may it continue. To return to ME, Richard mentioned a report I did in 2006. Well, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I'd been told there's no such thing as ME by all the medical friends that I had. They're no longer friends because they still believe it and I don't. They said there's no such thing, they make it up, they're kidding on and all the rest of it. And I fell out with them. Dinner parties have just disappeared from my life because all these consultants just told me there was no such thing. I'll say some more about them later. We did this report in 2006, the inquiry into the status of CFS-ME in research into causes and treatment. One of the conclusions was that we should put £11 million into medical research. God, how conservative I was in those days, you know. 11 million's nothing. I meant billion, really, you know. But the interesting thing was, not only did we say that, but we said things from the people who were writing it up, how they were concerned about what was happening too. It was unanimous. There were people on the inquiry, there were friends I worked with in Parliament. There's a man called the Countess of Mar, who's not here tonight, but she's still active. A woman called Baroness Cumberledge, who was the Tory minister at the time, very influential, still very influential in health. She signed it. She came to the meetings. A man called Lord Turnberg, who was the president of the Royal College of Physicians, and he, after it was signed, came to me and said, I'll have to get out of it, Ian, because my colleagues, you know, in the high places in medicine have told me to get out of it very quick, you know. And I said, Leslie, tell him to bugger off, and he did. So he went along with our studies, our interviews, and heard what was being said. There were people on both sides of the argument at the time, and they came down on the basis of biomedical and scientific interactions to find out what was the cause of it all. So it was a very interesting report, and we did get, not just me got slagged off for what we were doing, and I'll say something later about it, but my staff got it too. It was before the time of Facebook, and now we would really get it, you know. We just got nasty phone calls, nasty letters and threats and all that. Now, as a politician, you get used to that. Everybody doesn't love you, you know, which is a shame, but there you go. That's how it is. And it was my staff I was very sorry for, because they were right, and when I was in the office, they would get the phone call and be slagged off. So there was some nasty stuff going on, but they learned to live with it, and now they've gone on and do very, very important jobs with charities in other parts of this country. I was encouraged to set up this inquiry by a young man called Kevin Short in Norwich, who came to see me. He was somebody I'd known for years, and he was very ill, and I went home with him and talked to him. And then he got me to see some young people in my constituency who hadn't been out of bed for ages. And I was suddenly converted almost overnight that this wasn't people kidding. This was a serious problem that was being ignored. There were young people, young women, young men, and, you know, they were in different areas of my constituency, and it was a real problem, and still is. I revisited in some of them recently, and they still have a hard time. So, why did I really feel bad about not getting that 11 million? Because we were ignored. There were pals of mine in the government at the time who were minister of this, that, and the other. And what they said was, you know, we've been told we can't support you, Ian. And I said, well, tell you what, you're out of the football team next week. That was the hardest thing to do, but the nicest, because they had it coming to them if they wouldn't support our report. And some of the things that were said to us were amazing. The Minister of Health at the time, who's now Lord Mayor of Manchester, as a matter of fact, said to me, you know, well, we don't get any applications for good research, which you could call biomedical. And I said to him, Andy Burnham, I said, Andy, who told you that? You know, he said, oh, I can't tell you. I said, do you mean you haven't seen the subjects that people have asked for support and help for? He said, no, I've got it. So I think he got it from somebody somewhere. And I tell you what, before I die, I'm going to find those letters. The Freedom of Information Act is great. You can get stuck in and find things out. So somebody was working behind the scenes, making it very difficult. When £11 million is nothing, you know, it's absolutely nothing to help some support for this kind of research. And since then, I've always been worried. I teach at MIT and at universities all over the United Kingdom here. And Chomsky and I do talks together. And he is a sod, Chomsky. You know, he's the hardest man to work with in your life. He's the best anarchist I've ever met. But his heart is in the right place. He cares about people. And we have students at MIT who are doing PhDs now. You don't teach students at MIT. They teach you, actually. Before you open your mouth, they're telling you what you should say. It's really quite exciting and easy money, if you want it. And we do this course with them about how policies are made by government, and it's one of the issues I take up is ME, because I have never understood why we didn't get that support. Friends of mine, I can understand they were got at because they were young and developing in the ministerial positions in government, but they didn't even read the report. And I've talked to them since, and they say, well, you were probably right, but it was more than life was worth to support you. So call me a cynic if you like, but you get used to that kind of thing in politics. People, for various reasons, have to back off and don't support you. And I read recently where they were doing what's called phage biology, which is a virus that attacks bacteria. And some woman, it said, had been cured by phages killing resistant cells, bacterial cells, which were resistant to various antibiotics. And you know, they're having a bit of trouble about getting that through the markets and getting it extended to other people. And I read what they said about it. It said, politics has hampered the development of life-saving new therapies. And I thought, that's very familiar, that kind of experience. And I wonder why that happens. Why does politics behave in that kind of way? And I've always been interested in that. Because I knew when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister and I served with him, we got a cancer czar. Getting a czar was quite good. There was one person who was appointed to look after the whole of cancer in Britain. We doubled the budget almost immediately, okay? Charities merged together, the two big charities in Britain, the British Empire Cancer and Imperial Cancer, they merged together on the basis that they never could do that or they would lose money. But funnily enough, I got phone calls from both of their heads of trustees who said, we're going to do it, but we'll never declare it publicly. And one night I got a call a year later to say that the trustees had agreed to do it. So yes, it could happen. And Tony Blair called a summit. Now, why did he do it for cancer and wouldn't do it for some other things? You know, the cancer money is huge. The money mostly comes from charities, but then we made it a similar amount from government and so on. So it can happen. And Blair's government did things like that. And we built hospitals next door to research labs, because we'd been to the States and we saw what happened in Washington in hospitals there, and we knew that working together was the big thing. And it is working in Britain now, although it's moving back. The waiting list was suddenly shortened down to weeks rather than months to get the cancer identified. So there was something did happen, and it meant standing up and being rude at a meeting when Blair was at it and so on. But he would say to you, thank you for doing that, that helps. So you've got to go in there, even though you don't make friends very easily, it was important to do that. And there's other things too. One of the other things I should tell you was we saved the bees. Now, I'm not sure many are beekeepers or care very much about bees, but the bees were disappearing off the horizon. And Einstein said, if the bees disappear, humanity will disappear too. It's not a very strong argument in front of politicians, but we used it. But then we found out when they told us to sod off, they were not getting any money for bee research, and there were universities in Britain doing bee research. We found out that the whole industry of fruit trees in Dorset and parts of southern England depended on bees pollinating them. And we missed it to begin with, but then we picked it up. It was a huge industry and a lot of money involved in it, very essential for people's livelihoods, but, you know, also created things that people like to buy in shops. So there are arguments you can make, and it's just finding that, and you don't spot it automatically. And we had beekeepers down marching and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't have the same effect as being able to argue that a multi-million pounds industry was very, very important to this country, and that made a difference. So you can make things happen if you're determined. And the guy who got me interested in was the president of the beekeepers in Britain, who'd been a student with me. He came to say, I knew you would help, you know, so we did. And he got an OBE from the government recently and had a big party in Mayfair, which I couldn't go to, but I know other people who did. And it's amazing how things can just happen because people are determined to make it. I'm very polite. You can just argue about the issue and you can win it. Now, debates have taken place on ME in Parliament for years. You know, when I was there was one about our report and so on, and then there was one this year. Now, it's a long time from, when was it, 2006 to 2019. I read the speeches. They were exactly the same. Nothing had changed at all. Well, there were a few things about money being given for this or that, but the issues were still there. People were being ignored. The whole issue was not being researched. There was no interest at all in medical matters, and it was a woman from the Scottish Nationalist Party that brought it up. And it was just interesting, and I wondered, why has nothing happened since? You know, somebody else might have taken it up and continuous pressure gone on. Parliamentary debates and talks have gone on about the issue, but nothing much has changed very much. So what else did we do in the report? Well, I just want to do briefly one thing that we did in the report was the benefits that people got. Now, I think a couple of years ago, the first question we got in the Friday session of this conference routine was about benefits. What are you going to do about benefits? Now, we mentioned all the benefit problems that people had in this country because we talked to them. So I wanted to know the other week what had changed. And I wrote to a woman who's the most dangerous woman in England. She lives in Sheffield, and she runs the disability campaigns up and down in this country. And I asked her what it was like to have ME and go in front of the Department of Work and Pensions to try and get your benefit. And she said, there's a prejudice there. I can read the actual words, but the idea was there was a prejudice there that they're not going to get anything right away because ME, well, you know, it's not really a serious thing. People get over it and so on their own. And there was another argument that she made too to me. She said, the other thing you've got to realize, and it's not just ME, there's all sorts of other things, but there are doctors and medical people, ex-nurses, who work for the DWP as advisors now, and they also work for insurance companies. We said that in our report, and it's still true, because I'd never spoken to this woman until I phoned her up, and she came out with it just voluntarily. And it still goes on. So a lot of people then appeal, and I think 90% of the people win their appeals. So that in itself tells you, you know, it's all a question of having the energy or having the support to go back and call for what I think is your right. So that was another issue we took up, but nobody picked it up at the time, and it's suddenly become big news now in this country, and disability marches and demonstrations are happening all the time. So I'm interested in what we're going to do. What is to be done? There was a very famous politician once said, I'll let you guess who it was, but he once said, what is to be done? What are we going to do? And what we're going to do, of course, is we've got new young researchers, old researchers as well. What the heck, who cares what age people are? You've got the energy, you've got time to do it, get on with it, you know. And I think what we're going to do is make sure what we were talking about earlier today about working together and asking the kind of questions, taking those risks. And as I said on Monday, think of Watson and Crick. You know, they spent a long time wandering around thinking what they were going to work on, and suddenly they came out with a small little paper in Nature, which a lot of people said, confident, overconfident Cambridge types, you know, and Americans and all that. I remember the classic pitch from British scientists, and how important was a DNA paper that identified a double helix when you think of all the things that are happening now in terms of DNA, gene therapy, and so on. I want to build centres, and I don't want centres. I want centres that are not just based in London, you know, because that is a problem in this country. We need them spread around. And getting the one in Norwich was quite important. The story about that in Simon and Tom will remember, Richard had seen me and said, I want to build a centre. It'll have to be private because there's no other way. I said, no, you won't. Let's go to the university, and they're public. We should do something there. We went, and Tom came along, and you did too, Simon, to the meeting with the university, and I got kind of mad. Was I mad or just... I was mad. But anyhow, I had a real go at these people that I knew. I'd appointed some of them. And they were being difficult about the charity. And I said, well, look, in my day, you know, we took the money and got on with it. And that's what you should be doing. And with the support of Tom and Simon, we got this group going now at the Quadram Centre, of which you hear some of the work today. Now, it's not big enough for me. I want a Crick Institute in Norwich. I want a Crick Institute around every corner. People used to build buildings in this country, and I said, when you go to Hong Kong, there's one on every street there, the building you want to build. And you've got to be ambitious. Now, getting the money is not difficult. We'll close Parliament. We'll take some money from there. But there's other places, too, that money comes out. Brexit, for example, today, I think it's about £79 million to allow companies now to make the changes that are necessary. Oh, no, I know what the 79 is. It's for financial whiz kids, Pricehouse, Waterhouse, and so on, Price Waterhouse, who are telling people how to run their affairs, and it costs a lot of money, these consultants. So the money suddenly appears. So I have never in my life been put off by people who say there's no money, because I just don't believe it. When they want it, they find it. In this country for Brexit, they gave money to a ferry company that had never run a ferry company in its life. You know, amazing amount of money. And there was a bit of a stink about it, and they withdrew it, but then they had to pay compensation to this company, which didn't have any ferries, but they were going to ferry things across the English Channel, you know, when the crisis hits, as everybody predicts it's going to. I can't wait. It's going to be really interesting when the crisis. I don't really think much is going to happen, because people are pretty resilient and can get around these kind of things. I also want, as we talked this afternoon about a conference, my idea of a conference is like it's UNESCO, held in Geneva. I do some work with UNESCO, and they've got quite a lot of money for different projects in Africa and South America, and that's why I mentioned we don't know what the ME situation is across the world. And I tell you this, that malaria is still going on. There are thousands of people still die of malaria, although we've put loads of money in different places, and now they're suddenly finding that the mosquitoes become resistant to certain treatments and so on. And, you know, really brilliant to suddenly find that out. So, I mean, they're going to have a global policy, I think, on ME2, because it is a global problem. And I think we should seize the opportunity now with our enthusiasm, our knowledge growing, the determination to find out more and do something for countries like in Africa, because I do not believe that ME is just restricted to the 14 countries that are here. It's a huge world problem, and we have a responsibility to make the noise for that. I also said to somebody, I've been involved in climate change things, because Norwich had a very good centre on climate change in the Department of Environment there, and they started it off. And we never took climate change very seriously when it started in the 70s, but it has obviously become a huge, huge issue now, and people are realizing there's so many things that need to be done. But one thing that may happen is, if infection is important in ME or anything else, that bug can move from one part of the world to the other and may be implicated in various illnesses like, I guess, ME. And then we're going to have to take that as part of the equation too. I have never seen that discussed anywhere, but I think the time is right that we've got to think big about these kind of things having a potential and seeing if we can map what might be happening. So that conference could be very good. UNESCO's had conferences in the past. They had a big one a few years ago. I remember it was about racism in science. And they got all the people together, the policymakers, the deniers that there was any problem whatsoever. And secondly, they got the scientists who wanted to do something about it, acknowledging that racism is a huge issue, not just in the employment of people in science, but across the world. And that science sometimes used its knowledge to show that there was an inferior race and so on. And what happened was nothing. That was 30 years ago, and nothing much has happened because it's come back again. So you really, really have to take these things seriously and get on terms with them and do something about it. And I think the time has come for that. The other thing, too, I want to finish on this, is how deniers work. There are people in this world who now deny us climate change is coming to stay with the Queen next week. You know, we'll be there. Hello, Donald, how are you? Yeah. Give him a bit of climate change, exchange. But so there are people like him. And when I remember talking about it in Parliament, I remember other MPs getting up and saying, oh, you're only saying that so you can get a grant for climate change. The deniers find all sorts of crazy reasons. Now, you want to say, oh, I need you. You know, but you can't. You've actually got to take them on and say, where's your evidence for that? And I'm going to say something about evidence just in a second. Measles vaccination, the MMR jab, a real problem in this country. People are dying, young people are dying, because they're not taking up the measles vaccination. A paper published in Lancet by a man who's been discredited ever since, has gone off to the States now to work, stopped a lot of people, gave them the excuse not to have their kids vaccinated, and that's causing a real problem. The mumps is on the increase, and of course measles is too in parts of this country, not across the place, and I believe it's the same in the United States too. And that was a paper that was peer-reviewed by Lancet, which is a very prime journal, and they got away with it. And one of the arguments, I've been at meetings with them, and one of the arguments was, it's worth sacrificing a few kids to stop the pharma companies making a lot of money. And I had to think about that. And I could see how they were thinking. And you've got to be quick enough on your feet to answer that kind of problem. They come up with reasons for it all the time. And I've got a whole list of them. Tobacco was another one. We had a real battle in this country to get the tobacco thing changed and to get all the evidence out of companies, and we used the Freedom of Information Act, and in the States they did it as well, where research had been done and it was suppressed and hidden and so on. And we suddenly one night in that place, Parliament, we were by 2-1, we won the vote to stop people smoking in restaurants like this. And all hell that was let loose. Freedom of the individual, all that kind of stuff came back to us, you know. And you had to answer it. You couldn't just say you're a bunch of idiots, you know. That's never good enough. You've actually got, because people are watching you, you've actually got to make the arguments why that kind of evidence is important to know that tobacco and lung cancer are correlated and causal. And I remember too, the way the tobacco industry operated. They turned around and funded some good research on asbestos to show that white and blue asbestos caused cancer. And their argument, I remember the meeting very well, was, isn't it better to get cancer by doing something you enjoy than by doing... Always, what the hell? How do you argue with people like that? The tendency is to smack them in the mouth and run, but you don't. You have to argue with them what it means and quote figures and so on. So evidence, it's all right, we'll solve ME. I have absolute faith that someday we'll find out about ME or the MEs, whatever it turns out, we'll find it. But then we've got this hurdle of getting through the political process, because evidence is the hardest thing sometimes. I know civil servants very well, and they say to me, don't give me that bullshit, Ian, about evidence, you know. We've got a good policy without the evidence. We'll get the evidence that we need later. And that's very much a characteristic of the civil service across the world. And that there's other ways too that they handle it. There's a woman who I know who was helping the homeless, getting groups together. And she was at a dinner just like this one night, and she was speaking, and she said, if anybody mentions evidence-based medicine, I'll smack him with a bottle, you know. And she'd had a couple of drinks, but, you know, but nevertheless, there's that attitude that you've got to get over. And when we get the evidence, that's for me when the battle is going to start, because you'll find a lot of people who've got various interests will try and stop the thing happening. Because I've always wondered why we didn't get our thing through in a more serious way, and we tried pilot schemes. I've always wondered. And I asked people here today, and they said, well, because it's the cheaper way to do it was to admit it was psychiatric, mental, and it didn't cost anything. I'm not sure it's as simple as that, and that's the only reason. I think there's other reasons too. But as long as we're aware that even getting evidence, and as a scientist, that's what you want, and you're pretty sure the sun's going to rise tomorrow morning, you know, we're pretty sure it will somewhere, we hope. But anyhow, you know, people are going to argue against it. So it's a real battle, and we must be ready for it. Now, politics is boring. I started off by talking about politics. It's a hard, hard world. My wife regrets I ever went into it, you know. But I told you about her experience in Vancouver, so she should talk. And I think that we're going to have to think about that seriously when we get the evidence, and we will. So I just wanted to finish on this note, that this meeting today has illustrated to me about all the interesting things that are going on in this field, and that we should have real hope that we're going to find that solution eventually. You know, I think that, you know, some of the bodies that give the money need to be reformed. I said to somebody today, the Medical Research Council, I knew the woman who ran the health service in this country quite well. She just retired and gone to Oxford to run a college. And she said to me, we've got to get rid of the Medical Research Council. It's all run by Oxford, Cambridge people, and there's an elite there, and the money goes to certain universities. It's true if you look at it. There is no doubt the figures show, and that's because all the best people are in those universities, in London, for example. It is not true. There are good people in Hull, in Newcastle, and in smaller universities and so on. And their work is never given that same criteria and judgment as it should be. So we have to look at some of the committee structures, what they're in. And I think the money could go to the Department of Health just as easily. And this is what this woman and I once talked about. And instead of giving it to research councils, which are much more merged now as the technologies and techniques are shared between different disciplines. They don't necessarily split off into environmental things and medical things. They can go together. So we know that we're doing things that are important and that things are going to happen. Let's keep our vision, keep our hopes, keep our enthusiasm going, because we can do it, we can reach for the stars, and we can make it happen. I say this to finish, that the kaleidoscope has actually been shaken, and the pieces are going to fall in place for us. So let's do it for ME. Thank you.